Hey, welcome to Dad Space. Glad to have you here. It's Dave. I host another show called Living the Next Chapter. It's an author podcast, and we bring on amazing authors to talk about their journey, about their books, and all the great things they're doing. Sally came on a recent episode of Living the Next Chapter, and she came on to share a story about what it's like and how she's coping losing her son in an accident. He was in his early 20s. We chatted about addiction. We chatted about getting help. We chatted about what happens when people revert back to how they were before they got help. And Sally just wants to use her book and what she's done as an author to help parents. So if you, as a parent, are struggling with your kids and maybe they're on the wrong path from your point of view and you don't know what to do. Or another thing we get into in this conversation, which was really interesting, was how much of your personal story do you share with your own kids? And if you feel like you share too much, do you almost feel like you're giving them permission to do the same things that you did that you're not proud of when you were their age? Does your past come back as permission in the future for your kids? It's an interesting conversation. Sally and I get into this and we really have a great conversation. So I wanted to bring this conversation over here for you as a parent so that you could hear this story, connect with Sally, grab her book, and maybe this will be a great episode to share with somebody who's dealing with grief. Sally helps people. She's a therapist and she works through this for her clients, but she had to take her same skills, her tools that she uses for others, and apply it to herself. So we get into all of this on the show. I wanted to share with you because I think it's really important that we as parents find our path and support each other and find the best way to reach a kid who, in Sally's words, a wild child. And how do we parent when that happens? So Sally, welcome to the show, Sally. So glad to have you here and excited to talk to parents and share your story. Welcome to Dad Space.
Thank you, Dave, for having me. I'm so happy to be with you.
You're such a kind voice. I think for people who listen to podcasts, Sally, sometimes they don't see us on screen. All they have is a point of reference is a voice. And when I talk to you, you're just so kind. Your voice is kind. Have you heard that before?
I haven't, but someone did say, I did a presentation recently and they did say that they felt soothed by it. And so I guess, maybe this is just as a result of being a therapist and wanting to impart comfort to people. It must kind of come through.
Okay, let's expand on that a little bit. Who do you serve? Who do you work with? Tell us a little bit more about what you do to help people.
I love my work. I am in a private practice. I am specialized in addiction. So I see some people who are in recovery from addiction, but I also see my niche seems to be working with people who are in relationship with or have been impacted by someone else's addiction. And then anyone who's struggling with grief. I have my grief education certification. And of course, I've got my personal experience with grief and with addiction that I try to impart to my clients.
I love that you serve people. As you're talking, in my head, I have several people I want to introduce you to because they're on a similar journey. They help people in a similar way, but you would be a great resource for them because they're a little bit early in their journey and you have been doing this for a while. So we'll make connections after we're done here today, but I've got some people I'd love for you to meet.
I appreciate that so much. It's all about connection, isn't it? That's part of what being here today is about. It's about just sort of bridging that feeling of maybe being separate and finding things that that are resonant
Right. I like that. Okay, so I mentioned to you before we had record, we have authors listening to the show. They're new to the journey of writing. Here you are, a published author. You're their inspiration right here in this moment. You know things that are just common to you now that you didn't know when you first started, but could really help somebody listening as a new author. If you could sit down with a fellow author early in their beginning of their journey writing, is there any kind of tips or wisdom you'd share with them to encourage them, inspire them to move forward?
Absolutely. What an incredible journey it has been, not just to be grieving, but simultaneously writing through my grief. And that's what brought me to writing my memoir. It originated with journaling to my son Christopher, who died 9 years ago, as a means to connect to him. And then ultimately, when I decided to turn it into a memoir, I wanted to write it well. I'd been an English and dance major in college, and so I'd learned a few things. I recalled all of these afternoons sitting in a library writing, attempting to write poetry. I was always sort of more of a creative. And there are so many things that I learned throughout about the craft of writing that were a little bit difficult to learn, humbling to learn. I remember I got lucky. I began this, I sort of, anything goes at this point. I had lost my son. I'd begun to write to connect to him and put my grief out on the page. And then I discovered that there was a woman I knew who hosted writing retreats. So I just often attended a writing retreat in Montana, which I never would have done. I wouldn't have necessarily even, it was just sort of like, taking this big leap of faith and throwing some money to the wind, because there is an expense associated with putting one's work out into the world, but worth it. I then was connected to other women who were also writing memoirs, and together we began this process of helping each other be accountable and disciplined in the work, but also supporting one another. And some of them, they're close friends of mine today. They came to attend my book launch in April. And that's just an added gift that I never even anticipated. But there was some tough love too, because they could say, you know what, Sally, this first draft that you think makes a book is nowhere near ready to go out into the world and have readers read it, because it's, and it was because this is the nature of grief. It's redundant, it's consuming, it's saturated me. And so I was, as if you needed to know thousands of times how much I was missing my child. And so while I wanted to help bring readers into my emotion, because that's a challenge, and I like a challenge. And of course, as a therapist, I'm so intrigued by what's happening inside of us. So I wanted to kind of find a way to help people know what it felt like, or to help fellow grievers feel less alone. And then I needed to learn the craft. I needed to know what it was like to write a scene. I wanted to capture Christopher's life story and raising my wild child. I wanted to bring the reader in. I didn't know how to do that. I was doing much more telling than showing. And so I had to find my way.
The whole process of writing at a writing retreat, do you think you would have gotten to this point as an author to the same degree and the same ease, or the process had you not gone to that retreat at all? Do you think did that retreat made a big difference for you?
It made a huge difference
Okay.
because I would say to people who are just starting out, I did need some accountability. I was working full time. I was grieving full time. And there was something for me about setting at least every Sunday aside and allocating that time to do the writing. And it was through meeting these other women and sort of having them introduce me to this world of writers and um, classes about writing and all sorts of these different editing coaches that I was able to get some traction and learn some things. And it was fun because some of my English degree teachings came back to me. And then in other ways, I was doing things I had no frame of reference for. I mean, I didn't know how to write dialogue or that kind of thing.
Okay. So for someone who helps people through therapy, my curiosity, like for example, let's change gears. Let's say a dentist. A dentist can't do dental work on themselves. A dentist must go see another dentist. So therapy, you think that you have all the tools, you don't need any other help. Do therapists go and use the services of other therapists? Like, how does this work? I need to know.
Absolutely. That's such a good question because I, that sort of always be closing catchphrase that comes up in sales. And, I was in marketing once upon a time before I shifted into this work. Um, I believe in always be growing. I believe that I'm a much better therapist if I'm doing my own healing work. There's always room for growth, and losing my son catapulted me into a place where I needed to resolve past trauma as it impacted present trauma. And so I was, and I have been seeing, I believe in, especially if you're grieving, and especially if you're grieving over the loss of a child, to get all the help you possibly can,
Yeah.
which is so hard. Even as someone who preaches it, practicing some of the things that I would tell anyone else was an exercise for me. I had to sort of recondition myself to ask for help, to receive it, to put all sorts of supports in place, to use every possible, whether it was indulging in getting a massage because grief physically impacted my body, or actually using the written word to help me process my own feelings outside of a therapist,
Yeah.
even.
Okay. So you're in talking with therapy, you're talking to somebody, they're helping you. Do you still have to turn off your therapist brain in that, where you're like anticipating the next question and, well, I would have asked it this way if they were in my just to see me. Like, do you have to then turn into somebody who's there for help instead of trying to be the helper in that moment?
Yes. And it's so interesting because since I've put my memoir out into the world, um, I've had some people suggesting that, I'm so vulnerable. I'm so open. I'm very transparent. And one of the things that I remember early on as I was contemplating whether to, you know, go for it with this book was consulting with a medium who was channeling Christopher and
Mm,
saying, honey, how would you feel if I'm, exposing your life story and mine to others? And his message through the medium was to speak the truth in the with the objective of service. And so even from the beginning, when I wanted to do this, I think I needed selfishly to feel like my pain could in some way help me, you know, accumulate some wisdom that I could impart, because I think that's just who I am, and what I need is to
Yeah.
be able to feel like I'm helping.
So the book is Reaching for Beautiful, Memoir of Loving and Losing a Wild Child. And so I'd love to kind of get into a little bit of the story about your son as well, just to give some context to the readers so they understand kind of what has happened in the past. And I'm a parent of 3 adult children. I can't imagine a day where I would have to be faced with that type of news about losing one of my kids. Sally, I don't know how I would respond to that. I can't even imagine the flood of emotions in a moment like that. Could you kind of take us back and share a little bit about the story so we can help the readers?
I absolutely will. I think you expressed so vividly what most parents experience when they hear that someone has lost a child. And unfortunately, way too many of us are losing children, whether it's attributable to the opioid epidemic, whether it's attributable to increasing rates of suicide and sort of being in, I think, some mental health crisis
Yeah.
currently, with high rates of anxiety and depression, etc. Christopher died in an accident with 3 other young men. He was home. He was 21. He was home from college on his holiday break, and he went up to spend a night at a friend's lake house in Wisconsin. I imagined that would be a fairly relatively benign way to be spending his time with a whole group of boys. He had just had a night out, New Year's Eve, and come through that in the city at the bars. And he was, like myself, an alcoholic, and I'm in recovery. It's been a long time. I got sober when I was 25.
Well,
Um, and I'm so grateful that I did. And all of my children, unfortunately, have inherited my husband and my genes. And so this is sort of a generational addictive legacy that runs through both sides. And I've since come to find, I just looked this up recently. If you have 2 parents who are addictive, then you run the risk of inheriting that, up to 8 times more likely to inherit it. So
wow.
it's just something we kind of need to know, that this is, potent genetic material
Okay.
and so I was striving to prevent my son from also, having to deal with being an alcoholic, because it's not an easy path. But we did intervene in such a way as he was able to have 3 years of where he was clean and sober. And that was a real gift of a time period, even though we had to send him away to make that happen. And we were privileged enough to be able to afford to do that. And he then, when he wanted to be like the rest of his peers, which is always something that drove him because his friends were everything to him, my wild child went and immediately got into a fraternity and formed a wonderful brotherhood with, I can't even tell you how many young men, and had this chapter of a few years of that lifestyle again of partying, which is inevitable at that age, and was doing that when he was up at this lake house, and they all decided to go out onto a canoe in on a frozen lake, and none of them survived that. So it was a
Wow.
very, very traumatic experience. My world fell out from under me. I'd probably been in fight or flight from the moment Christopher arrived and began running at 9 months, and then was just constantly in motion, all in such a Mustang. And for much of it, I didn't even know what I was doing. I didn't even appreciate until he turned 10 that he had attention deficit. And of course, his father did as well, but I was sort of oblivious to what that looked like. And what it looked like was just doing everything in my power to try to keep him safe, because he didn't tend to think outside of the moment that he was in.
Okay.
And that was part of his beauty. He
Yeah.
was beautiful in every way, as far as I'm concerned. I'm attracted to that energy and charm, and he was loving. And so there wasn't an underdog that he didn't try to have show compassion for.
Yeah.
So part of my grieving journey is just to embody his spirit, to keep it alive, to share it. I hope that in reaching for beautiful, anyone, and it feels like this is happening, anyone who didn't know him when he was here, who reads it, gets this incredible sense of this unique, you just, of course, I'm bragging, but I like to be able to have bragging rights, as we all do with our
Yeah.
children, right?
Yeah. Right. Your relationship with your son, like growing up as he went through his teen years and everything, how close were the two of you?
I say this now, all that we love deeply becomes a part of us.
Yeah.
I feel like he's a part of me, but I don't know. I just loved him and love him fiercely.
Yeah.
I was crazy about him. I had a crush on him. My poor husband says, you know what? I think you had much more of a crush on him than on me. And so I was his biggest fan. And at the same time, he was extremely challenging. It was always trouble. He had 3 near-death accidents before he ultimately passed at 21. He kept me on my toes. I felt fairly insecure as a mother, because I thought it was my job to rein him in, and he couldn't be. And now I can say, oh, I wouldn't have wanted to. But I think we were, and yet for those who have a loved one who's struggling with addiction, if they're in their addiction or they're ashamed of being in their addiction, they want to keep their distance. Also, remember, he was only 21. So there was that period of, he was always so independent. So there was sort of, for me, this chasing quality to it. I just wanted more of him. He slipped through my fingers. What that 3-year period of time when he was clean and sober and spending it in Arizona created was a chance to have quality one-on-one time with him. And we really bonded, sort of rebonded as we had when he was little, before his siblings came along.
Yeah.
And that was pretty special. And I think even when he began drinking and doing drugs again, we were able to maintain a closeness. And part of that was because I was doing my own work. I was going to self-help meetings that were designed to help me let go of my own fear, calm my nervous system so that it wasn't so hijacked, so that I wasn't so driven to control. I discovered then that my only job was really just to love him unconditionally. And that's something I've try to apply to my living children as well. When he did die and I was traumatized, I asked myself whether, oh, wait a minute, I'd let go of fear. Does that mean I'm doing this wrong after all? And it very quickly became clear to me that no, it would have interfered. If I'd been fearful, it would have interfered in the connection that we had. I would have not been able to be as present. And so that to me is one of the messages that I share with parents for whom the stakes may not be this high. They may not have a reckless, wild child, but they're in fear anyway, because that's what parents do. We think it's our job to keep our children safe,
Yep.
certainly to keep them alive.
Right.
And sometimes we think it's our job to prevent them from going through hard things. And yet, intellectually, I know it's not. I know also as a therapist that it's when we move through, like the darkest nights, that's when the light gets in. That's when we have opportunities to regain perspective and light. And that's how we grow.
So how does Reaching for Beautiful kind of address some of the things we're talking about together, you and I together today, for the reader? Kind of unpack a little bit about what's your intent for the book.
My intent, too, is to help people who may not be grieving the loss of a child. Well, of course, I want the people who are to feel less alone in it and feel like there's some resonance there. But I also want to educate people who have that instinctive response that is, oh my gosh, this is so frightening. I don't even want to broach the subject. I'm going to run from it. To lean in when their friends lose a child, when their family members do. Even if it's just for a moment, I'm trying to kind of promote a little bit more comfort
Yeah.
with the subject of death and grief, because we all die, and many of us are grieving, and most of us, who wants to feel that kind of pain? Most of us, we fight it. We fight it, and we fight it in others. I still have family members who can't approach this very easily with me. But as someone who's grieving, I actually want people to touch in and just take a moment to imagine what that would feel like. And not because I want everyone else to be miserable alongside me,
Mm-hmm.
but so that I feel less alienated, that I feel sort of met, so that I don't feel worse than I already do.
So it can help people with loss,
Yes.
from maybe a loss of a family member, a loved one. But then there's also loss that we also experience just internally for ourselves, where
Yes.
loss and grief can show up in many different ways and some unexpected ways. Even just what we would consider maybe a lesser experience in some terms where, hey, I've lost my job, or I've lost my identity, I lost my purpose. There's a lot of different things people are wrestling with. So your book cannot expand a little bit into some of the margins where it's not exactly what you intended, but could really help an audience that's looking for support.
I agree. I think this part about loving a wild child is also designed to help parents who are raising children, and this is true for many of us, who are different than we thought they'd be, and moving into reconciling that our agenda for them, it might be very different than who they are and who they become. And I felt some shame initially when I saw that Christopher was struggling in school. I felt some differentness already as um, an alcoholic, the daughter of an alcoholic, the daughter of the child of divorce. None of us like to feel different. And yet, our differences are the things that we should celebrate, or our similarities are the things that can connect us. We all have hearts and feelings. And so I think the grieving can come in all different forms, but sometimes it's just simply all of the disappointments that life brings where people don't, they disappoint, or,
Yeah.
our hopes don't come to fruition. Those are the same feelings that you feel when you're faced with coming to terms that your child is no longer here in physical form.
If somebody came to you and was asking, am I responsible for the decisions my kids make in life? Is that a
Mm.
reflection on my parenting? Is that a reflection on me as a human, that my children picked a path that I didn't want for them? Am I responsible for these decisions my kids make?
Dave, that's such a poignant question for me because I used to think I had so much more power than I do.
Right.
And having at least 2 out of 3 of my children be as defiant as they are, um, or were, has helped me to appreciate that you try to, you just love them furiously, as I have, and you try to instill values, and you try to give them guidance. But over time, and it happens so quickly, as you yourself know, I can't
Right.
believe that I have,
I know.
Christopher would be 31 now, and I've got a 29-year-old and a 25-year-old. And very quickly, it's really less about anything I have to say and more about um, listening. And so I think we overestimate how much we can control things. Now, there's some kids that are much more compliant and actually do what you say, but that wasn't my experience. And even then, they're gonna go their own ways, and
Right.
bless them.
I just think that there's maybe a parent that's really wrestling with this right now as they listen to this conversation, going, it's so hard to
So
see my
hard.
kids struggle. It's so hard to see my kids addicted to something or following the path that I wish they would not do. And despite all of my efforts, it just doesn't seem to resonate with them, and it doesn't seem to make a difference. But I can see through my own life, and maybe some of the things I've done that I'm not particularly fond of, that there is something that might be a result of a path that I feel as a parent could be the wrong choice. And I don't know what to do right in that moment.
Right. It's a very delicate tightrope walk
Yeah.
because, um, and this is something that I talk to clients about often, and I think about often, is that it doesn't, just to say that we are essentially pretty powerless doesn't mean we don't have, and shouldn't um, take responsibility for actually not enabling them. For we really owe it to ourselves to let them know when we do think they're making choices that are not going to serve them. They may very well do it anyway. I've got that happening in one of my child's lives right now. He's making a choice that he knows I'd prefer he didn't, but he needs to, just as many of us do, and certainly, me and my children, we need to kind of discover this on our own. And a lot of times, the only way that we're going to be incentivized as humans to make changes is when we're met with some pretty difficult consequences. Many of us parents, we can't bear to have them meeting these negative consequences. But where we can, I think it's appropriate because it's like, yeah, you're going to find out and you might discover that that's not working for you.
when our kids come to that realization, despite our best efforts to steer them away, they still go down the path and realize they're maybe on the wrong path. What's our response to our kids in that moment? Is it, I told you so? I don't think that's helpful. What can we do as parents when our kids realize, right?
Isn't it? Yeah. And and no, it's that's where the opportunity to be as loving as we can be, and if we're being loving and present unconditionally, despite the fact that they make choices that we're not in support of, then they're going to be much more likely to say, you know what, it didn't turn out the way I hoped it would. And what do you suggest I do now? As opposed to the second we do any kind of shaming or blaming, that's they're going to want to steer clear.
What do you say to a parent, though, that maybe you as a parent struggled and your struggles and how you've been overcoming? By us maybe telling our kids about our struggles and kind of making that a point of so they understand our journey, does that not in some cases create, well, from their point of view as our kids thinking, well, you're fine. So you did all these things in your past. So that means I can do them because you did it and you turned out okay. So that gives me permission to do what you did. But like, how do we not glorify the things that we did that we're not proud of?
It's funny that you mentioned that because, yes, I actually avoided telling my children for a long time that I was in recovery because I didn't want to condone my behavior. I actually, and I am, exceedingly honest. And I remember my daughter asking me if I had smoked, and I said no, and it killed me to do that, but I didn't want her to then think it was okay. But the truth was that then when we did have to intervene fairly early with Christopher, it did make sense. And I feel like it's part of what I do in my work as well, to share my own experience, because the purpose of that is to destigmatize, to make it feel like, okay, everybody's human. We make mistakes, and this is something that my parents have had to overcome, and it looks like now it's my turn.
Yeah, it's that balance, right? It's like,
that balancing act.
right? And the kids, they're going to pick up on it, especially in their like teenage years or early adult years. They're going to push us and go, I need to know more. And like, Mom, Dad, tell me about your story. And I don't want to glorify the past, but at the same time, there's lessons, right? So I'm balancing between the two.
That's right. That's right. And it is interesting. I just had someone sharing with me, one of my clients, about this subject coming up with her and depending upon their ages,
Right.
we want to be honest, but we don't want to indulge in that to such an extent that that they think that's grants them permission.
The response from your family around reaching for beautiful. How is your family, your community, your friends responding to the book and you sharing Christopher's story?
I'm really amazed by the feedback that I've gotten, that because it's not an easy book to read. It starts at a point when Christopher has just passed, and it's sort of set during the first year and a half after he died. So I am in acute grief during this period. And it goes back and tells his life story and what it was like to raise him. And if someone can get through the early parts, I think there are so many gifts. And the people who, again, are willing to move through that difficult part give me a gift, because they've walked alongside me. And there are people who've said, I couldn't put it down, which really surprised me, because I thought they're going to have to pace themselves,
Yeah.
But, and then admittedly, there's some people who, I just had a family member recently. I know she read it, but she can't talk to me about it. I don't know why. you know? Um, and I have to be okay with that.
Right.
It's because it's a subject that's painful, and I have to respect that other people, especially those who knew and loved Christopher, they're being pretty brave.
Yeah. It doesn't seem like an easy book to write.
It was not. It was not. It was. So that's another thing for writers. It took many drafts, and it took 7 years to write.
Wow.
And what I do say in the book is that it was a little over 7 years it took me to actually feel like myself again. Grief is so complex, or it was for me, especially since grief over the loss of a child is inherently traumatic. There's so many things that needed healing. I needed to forgive myself, because one of the things that most grievers do, whether it's warranted or not, is blame themselves in some way, and they feel guilty. Um, so there was just a huge process. Part of it was helpful to me to be a therapist who could sort of learn to speak to myself more compassionately, just as I suggest my clients do, or to be gentler with myself, or to let the pain wash over me. There were times I couldn't have even helped it. I cried for years straight, every day, a lot of the day. Even, when I was working, I might have kept it at bay and then immediately left my job, and the tears poured. Now it comes to me still periodically in waves, in terms of just experiencing that gut-wrenching ache that he's not here physically. But gratefully, I've come to believe that he's very much, right here in spirit. And I get I get his presence. I feel it. As a feeler, I feel it, and it gives me joy. And I know he wants me to have survived this, even though there were moments I didn't know if I could. And he wants me to have a life where I help and serve other people in the field of addiction and grief. And he wants me to have joy.
I could talk to you all day. So, like I mentioned, your voice is just so calming and gentle, and to know that you've had this path that you've walked and continue to walk with others to help them. There's a gift. You have a gift. Unfortunately, the story is a big part of the gift, but the way you're turning it around and helping people through the book, and again, how you show up in this world, it's quite amazing.
Thank you, Dave. It means a lot.
Tell everybody, Sally, about your website. Again, I love it. It's gorgeous. But tell her about your website. And I do have one last question I want to wrap up with. But when we come to your website, what do you want us to see? What should we do first?
Well, when you do come to my website, which is www.sallymcquillen.com, you certainly have the opportunity to order my book, Reaching for Beautiful. If you are not interested in that, you can go to my media page and you can look at a series of podcast interviews that I've done, or you can just email me and communicate that way. So appreciate it.
So you mentioned that you felt led from Christopher to tell the truth in the book. Do you think you met that? And what is the truth then in the book?
The truth is that love is the only thing that really matters. And my son's tweet, which is Christopher, I think it was about a month before he passed. He was on Twitter, unbeknownst to me, and he put out in the world a mantra that I now very much attempt to live by, which is, life is honestly so beautiful as long as you allow it to be. And so even when we go through such difficulty and grief and despair, may we, sort of choose to see the beautiful.
our words carry on, right? And they carry a lot of weight. So, Christopher, thank you for those words. And Sally, thank you so much for sharing the story with us. I'm excited to send people your way. I know there's going to be so many more people helped through your book, through our conversation, and you continuing to show up. So thank you for all that you do.
My pleasure, Dave. Good to be with you.
Excellent. Everybody, all information is always in the show notes. Please, when you buy this book, because I know you are, you're going to buy one for yourself and you know somebody else that's going to love this. So buy one for them too. But leave a review. Let people know why this book is so powerful and share the key takeaway that you got from the book. That thing that just resonates with you that will not leave you alone after reading this book, put that in the review so that someone else reading it will know this is going to help them or help a loved one. That's what we can do as readers. So please support Sally in the book. And again, Sally, thank you so much for doing this. I appreciate it.
Appreciate you, Dave.
So thanks for being here. Thank you for listening to Dad Space. I really, really appreciate you being here. If this is your first time or you're coming back and back and back, it's great. Now, I am on a mission to talk to as many dads as I can through the show and connecting with you. You get to hear my voice by pressing play. I want to hear your voice by going to dadspace.ca and leaving me a voice message. I'd love to hear from you. And I'm on a mission to talk to 5 dads every month. 5 dads. 30 minutes maybe, tops, where we get together and just talk about maybe what you're getting out of the podcast, maybe how I can serve you in the content or with guests or topics. And just to hear from you. To hear from you as a listener would be outstanding. So go to dadspace.ca. There is a link right there where you can click on it and you can jump into my SpeakPipe link. It leaves a voice. You can leave a voice message, which comes to me in an email. I can respond to you directly in voicemail, or I can have you maybe even come on the show as a guest. It's completely up to you, whatever you feel comfortable with. But I'm here for you, and I'm so grateful that you're still here listening to this. So go to dadspace.ca and either let's get you on the show or let's you and I sit down with the calendar invite on my website and let's just have a conversation, one dad to another. Thank you for listening. And thank you for being here. Take care.